And then I'll also just start with introducing Dr. Keri Hudson Reykdal, veterinarian, and prairie vet. Prairie vet and Hudson Reykdal Veterinary Services. So Dr. Keri is a mixed farm animal practitioner and a WCVM graduate. She has been a veterinarian in the Interlake for almost 20 years, and with her origins as a city girl, Dr. Keri brings unique insight into the challenges of the food production industry faces. She also has a popular show on Animal Planet Canada on the Discovery Channel Canada, which follows her life and work in the Interlake and throughout Manitoba. After coming under attack by animal rights extremists, Dr. Keri brings her experiences, knowledge, and training to help promote animal welfare, the food production industry, and help producers avoid coming under attack while being advocates for the industry. Can everyone please help me in joining me to welcome Dr. Keri?
All right. It's good to see everybody here today. I'm really happy to be here speaking with you, and I'm talking about something that I think is very important and very current for our industry. I see tons of people left with the tax stuff. I guess that's all the old people that are just transferring their farms over. But so I'm talking to those of you that want to promote our industry. My name is Keri Hudson Reykdal. I'm a mixed animal practitioner from Ashern, Manitoba. I've been in Ashern since graduating from the college in 2000. I first worked in the district clinic for 13 years, and now I have a private clinic. So I keep in the spring and fall with my cow-calf clientele, and then year-round with my small animal clients. We also do a little bit of everything because we are rural, so I've got a mobile vet hospital on wheels, so we go to First Nation communities, work with them doing spay-neuter work, and as well I work with an animal shelter in Winnipeg. My practice has kind of evolved over the years to stay afloat in a rural community. As most of you are aware, it can be a little bit of a challenge. We've had droughts and floods and BSE, so we've had a lot of issues over the years that have made our lives challenging, to say the least. I also stay busy with a TV show on Animal Planet Canada. If none of you have seen it before, we really do try to promote the beef industry in particular, because that's what we have in Ashern, but just all aspects of animal welfare, which I think is really important for the work that we do. I am married for 16 years to Calvin, who has a cow-calf farm. They've got 600 mother cows, so he keeps busy with that. I do not lay claim to the farm much, although I go work for free for him all the time, which he loves. So, and I just want to say that I have a real respect for all progressive producers out there, no matter what industry they're in. So I'm here today to talk to you about raising livestock under the magnifying glass. So obstacles that we face as food producers have become increasingly challenging. And as an industry that's producing food for consumers, we need to be proactive in promoting and improving animal welfare, in educating the public about what we do, and in using humane and sustainable practices on our farms. So I believe that we can each do our part to promote and improve the food production industry. So we're not raising animals in the same world as our parents or grandparents were, and we need to stop thinking that things haven't changed. So I've been practicing for 20 years now, and I still hear it and see it all the time. But this is how I've always done it, and I don't think I should need to change. Or I've been using this chute for 30 years, and it's served me well. And it's like easy for you to say when you're not the one going in the chute, getting banged on the head and smashed around, or you're not the cow in it having to be prodded because the chute doesn't work properly. So there's probably mostly beef producers here, so I may get in trouble for saying this, but I do think beef producers are the worst for not wanting to change. Sorry, guys. But it just seems like beef producers on the whole don't like to be told what to do or how to do it, and we kind of have to drag them kicking and screaming into, thinking about change. So we need to recognize, and I can say that because my husband is a beef producer and I have to drag him around kicking and screaming sometimes, so I do have some basis for that. But we need to recognize when things can be done better and do them even if there is some financial input involved. So estimated figures of animals used for food production worldwide are at over 70 billion animals, and global population is expected to increase to 9 billion people by 2050, and food production is predicted to need to increase by 70 to 100% in the same time period. So to keep up with this demand, animal agriculture has moved from the small family farms to increasingly more intensive operations. So while these intensive operations can produce more and cheaper food, sometimes they do come with factors that have created unsustainable or deleterious environmental, social, human health, or animal welfare issues. So while food production has really grown, it's also created consequences that we have to address as we move forward. So the population demographic has also changed. So from 1931, when they first did a farm count, there was 3.2 million people living on farms, which was 32% of the population. In one or less than one lifetime, in 2006, farm population only accounted for 2.2% of the population. So in less than one lifetime, we've moved from 1 in 3 people to living on farms to 1 in 46. So it's a huge shift in dynamics. And during that time, Canada's population went from 10 million to 32 million, and now we're at 37.6 million. So these figures are very significant for our business because they affect how consumers see our business. Most people are removed now from their rural roots. They've never visited a farm, and they don't have a basic understanding of animal behavior or what we require for our livestock. So the population's growing, it needs to be fed, but they do care more than ever about how that's being done. So to add to these challenges, we're living in a new era which has been termed the post-truth era. So post-truth means that objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinions than appeals to emotion and personal belief. So emotion and personal belief are affecting people more than science, more than research. So if you see it on the internet, it must be true, right? So appeals to emotion are having more impact than good sound reasoning and factual information. So when this happens, alternative facts are created and anything can become true. So some of this culture is related to human nature, but a lot of it is due to social media use and the internet. So we now have vast quantities of information at our fingertips that were never readily available when I was young. When I was a kid, we'd go on road trips and argue for hours about, where Palm Springs was or where Australian shepherds came from. And, now you can just Google that and instantly those questions are answered, and we just don't have those fights anymore because that information is accessible right away. So this picture is from Iceland. Calvin and I were there this summer, and we were able to have a FaceTime video conference with his niece from the West Fjords, which is completely desolate. 7,300 people live there. It's massive, and we're able to be on the internet in the middle of nowhere. And while Iceland's cellular service clearly dominates rural Manitoba, The point remains that we have this access to tons of information at our fingertips 24 hours a day. But the problem is that factual information gets mixed up with fake news, and it can sometimes be difficult for the public to differentiate, especially when the information we're receiving agrees with our preconceived ideas. So for our industry, the post-truth represents some real challenges. It means that the public is able to receive an overwhelming amount of information about the animal industry from many different sources. And as we know, when bias is created, it can be very difficult to overcome. And if you take the term factory farm, if you think about what that means now to people, it means a lot different thing to producers on the whole than it does to the public. So now, like never before, consumers are concerned about where their food is coming from. But this concern is also coupled with a lack of basic understanding of animal husbandry and welfare. The majority of the population is urban and largely removed from and disconnected from agriculture. So the public now receives information about what we as producers do from a variety of sources. So one of the sources is the media, which definitely can have a bias from the journalist that's that's writing the article. So if they haven't done their due diligence, they can spread a lot of misinformation quickly, and then we spend hours and hours trying to counteract that. Then there's our favorite A&W, which their commercials were created to disrupt the market and gain market share. They weren't necessarily interested in working with producer groups on their ad campaigns, and they created the one that we all love to hate, which is the hormone and steroid-free meat. This advertising campaign has created a lot of ill will between producer groups and the community. But they do explain their reasoning behind their ad campaign, and it was a smart business decision for them. They've gained market share with the millennials that they're targeting. And if you go onto the A&W's website, it's actually pretty impressive. It's really user-friendly, and they have an obvious focus. And then there's companies like McDonald's who have chosen to work more with Canadian producers. They still have targets to use sustainable practices, and they're pushing producers towards the better practices, but it's been much more of an inclusive approach. So the public also gets information from animal production groups, such as we see a lot of advertising from dairy producer groups. So the public may perceive some bias because there is a self-interest in producer groups in showing what a good job they do. But a lot of producer groups are doing a great job now of creating transparency, showing the real faces of food production, which really builds trust with the consumer. So as food producers, we need to support these ad campaigns and be empathetic to consumers who don't have a background which allows them to inherently understand animal husbandry like those of us that work in the industry do. So patience, transparency, honesty, education. We need to educate without talking down to people. So we need to remember that just because people don't necessarily agree with what we're doing, it doesn't mean they're uneducated and they don't know a lot of information, they haven't done their research. It means they think about things differently, so that's where we need to have conversations, be willing to have a dialogue. And then I don't have a slide for it because I was just reading about it yesterday, but I think everybody probably saw the Trudeau buying the donuts from a local shop in Winnipeg and how much of a poop storm that's created. And it just goes to show that, well, part of it's because a lot of people don't like Trudeau, but what it's showing is people aren't comprehending, like they're like, well, he should have gone to Tim Hortons. It's like, well, Tim Hortons actually was bought out by Burger King, which is US-based, and the company that owns those is largely owned by Brazilian investors. So the government has now committed to spending millions on an ad campaign called Buy Canadian. So that should be a really good investment into what we do, and we really need to be supportive of that money being spent on us and speak up for it and why it's important. The other day, I had posted about this, and when I went to the Flying J to grab some beef jerky, the first package I grabbed was using Brazilian beef, and so I'm like, oh, I put that back because I'm aware of that now through the research that I've done. But otherwise, I would have just grabbed it and not thought about it. So put back the meat from Brazil, grab the Canadian product. So the other place that consumers are getting a lot of information from is animal rights groups. So there's a lot of propaganda that's being spread by animal rights groups, which they have an agenda to end all animal use by humans. That's cats, dogs, horses, everything. They believe that it's animal slavery and that all animals should be, set free or put into sanctuaries. But these groups are well funded. They're extremely technical savvy, and they appeal to emotion, and they often create we've seen the videos that they create to distort practices, and they tend to paint the entire industry with the same brush. So they'll use something that happened in a third world country and say that the same thing happens here in Canada. And while we know that's not true, the public doesn't necessarily know that. They also prey on the worst in humanity. They'll find somebody doing things poorly, and although that doesn't represent the industry, that's how they'll paint it for people. And if they're urban and just really don't know, then you can see where that creates problems for us. So as producers, we need to have very strong voices, speak up when we see things not being done correctly. If animals are being abused, if animals are being starved, we need to speak up for those, because those, if that gets filmed and put out there, how does that look for our industry? So we need to think about things like that. So where do people get most of their information from? It's likely whoever's the loudest, most interesting, or controversial, because we know drama sells. And it also is often from whoever has the most funding. So consumers are being inundated with A&W commercials, Beyond Meat propaganda, and from heavily funded animal rights groups. The volume and information and variety of sources makes it really difficult for producer groups to send a clear and accurate picture about what we do to consumers. And our industry is quite complex, and it can be difficult to summarize in catchy sound bites for the public. So we need to take advantage of one of the very big benefits that we have of living on the prairies, which is our low population density and vast amounts of space. We need to use this to our advantage, but also not take it for granted. So we can be the leading edge in this industry and lead by example. We have all the tools to do it here in Manitoba. So what does this post-truth era mean for our industry? We can't just make claims and expect the public to trust us. We must continually show improvement, transparency, and provide proof for the claims that we make. We also need to really listen to consumers and not disregard their concerns. We need to strive every day in our practices to do better. So one of the concepts that this doing better refers to is our social license. So the social license has been defined as existing when a project has the ongoing approval within the local community. So the social license has to be earned and it has to be maintained. And this concept does affect me as a veterinarian as well. So, for example, the Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association is self-regulated. So maintaining this autonomy relies on a mutual trust and respect with the public. So if the MVMA chooses to abuse the social license, it would create a lot of pushback from the public, and then the government could step in and decide to start making the rules for us. And we all know that when the government steps in and starts making the rules, it's generally not a good option for us. But self-regulation does come with a lot of responsibilities. So similarly, with the food production industry, we do rely on a social license to produce food. Over time, the public has been concerned about animal welfare, which has driven the development of the codes of practice to satisfy that social license. Some of the industries, like dairy, hogs, and poultry, have very comprehensive codes because of the intensive nature of their practices. For beef producers, we also have a code of practice, and it's been developed by the National Farm Animal Care Council. So the NFACC is the only organization in the world that brings together animal welfare groups, enforcement, government, and farmers under a collective decision-making policy, and they use scientific research to develop codes. So once these codes have been developed, then every 10 years they're overseen to make sure that any changes that need to be made are done. So in my opinion right now, and it's a personal opinion, but I think our food production industries are operating in the orange, which is acceptance tolerance, whereas we used to be in the yellow or even in the green, which was approval and public support. The shift in the public's perception and concern for animal welfare has put our industries in a position where we need to be actively seen as a good neighbor. And in this post-truth era that we're living in, we have to do more to demonstrate to the consumer that we're trustworthy. So part of demonstrating what we do and why we're trustworthy is the concept of the triple bottom line. So you've probably noticed a major shift in the way companies market themselves as compared to 20 years ago. So this trend is the triple bottom line, which addresses the business's impact on the planet, people, and profits. So companies recognize that the consumer is concerned about all three of these issues. Well, two of them for sure. They don't care if we make money or not, I don't think. But to be successful, we need to look at all the factors. We need to think about the triple bottom line in our operation. So how we're affecting the environment, the sustainability of our farms, the welfare of our animals, while still maintaining a viable business that supports our families. Obviously, these issues are important because they do affect how we run our businesses. But the companies that use the food that we're producing also have to demonstrate the triple bottom line. So that's why it's become very important to get on McDonald's sustainability projects, and so that they can also show to consumers what they're doing for the environment, for example. So I want to talk about animal welfare and the 5 freedoms. So public awareness and concern about animal welfare has been the major driver of change in the food production industry throughout history. So originally, the phrase, the 5 freedoms, was developed after the idea of the 4 freedoms, which was introduced by Franklin Roosevelt in 1941. So Roosevelt's aspirations were freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. Now, he wasn't making it an article of law that everyone had to experience these all the time. They were aspirations, something to live up to, as are the 5 freedoms. So the 5 freedoms of animal welfare were developed in the UK in 1965 in response to the changing and very intensive livestock and poultry farming practices. And then they were refined again in 1979 by the Farm Animal Welfare Council. And then these freedoms were added to by including 5 provisions in 1993. So, and even now, these freedoms are under scrutiny, and they've changed to welfare aims. And the reason that they've changed was they were finding that there was two key disadvantages to the freedoms, which was that they were often misunderstood to mean that complete freedom from these experiences and states were possible, when in fact the best we can do is for them to be minimized. And the original focus of the freedoms was on negative experiences and states, which is now seen to be a disadvantage in view of the current understanding that animal welfare management should also include the promotion of positive experiences. So scientific understanding of animal welfare has evolved beyond simply the absence of suffering to include the quality of an animal's entire experience with its environment, such as positive states, preferences, motivations, and aversions. So the most up-to-date version of the freedoms includes these positive states and aims. So for example, it used to be the freedom from thirst and hunger. They've changed it now to good nutrition. The provision is provide ready access to fresh water and a diet to maintain full health and vigor. And then the welfare aim is to minimize thirst and hunger and enable eating to be a pleasurable experience. And that's just been a driver because people care about animal welfare. They care about the animal's experience until it goes to be our food, and it's something that we really need to focus on in our day-to-day practices. So having a copy of these welfare aims on hand to just be kind of that reminder of the things that we need to think about, the things that our consumers care about, is a really good idea. So animal sentience has been and continues to be a controversial subject. Many countries have declared animals sentient under the law. So the European Union, New Zealand, India, and others have all declared animals as sentient. In 2015, Quebec has also passed a bill declaring that some animals are sentient with biological needs, so dogs, cats, horses, and animals raised for fur. They're still considered properly, but basically when they're recognized as sentient and not the same as an inanimate object, it allows for harsher sentencing on animal cruelty, among other things. But the main holdup in many places in declaring animals sentient under the law is that it's viewed as a gateway for animal rights activists that want to give animals full rights, so the same rights as humans. So that's been kind of the hold-up, is because that law then could be interpreted in many numbers of ways that you can imagine could create a lot of problems for our industry. So the science of animal sentience is the reason that animal welfare has become such an important subject. Animal sentience refers to the ability of animals to experience pleasurable states such as joy and aversive states such as pain and fear. So in 2012, a group of scientists came together to sign the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, which says that the absence of a neocortex does not appear to preclude an organism from experiencing affective states. So basically it says non-human animals have consciousness. So animals are sentient. I think all of us that work with animals know this inherently. They experience fear and pain and suffering, and they experience joy. Example of that, when you go out to feed your cattle during calving season, all those calves get up running and bucking and playing. It's pretty clear that they're pretty happy little calves. Or when that calf goes to sleep in the straw, its mom leaves to go eat, and the calf wakes up and it's all alone, they can clearly become fearful. Or when we go out, take our dogs for a walk, and the dog is going wild with excitement, it's quite clear that they are crazy happy. I think that's something that isn't even a question nowadays. We know that animals are sentient. We also do, though, know that animals experience or have very strong instincts. So the amazing ability of that calf to get up 5 minutes from when it was born, suck, find the teat, get up, be able to walk around. They've developed those instincts over time as a method for survival. And even with domestication and the absence of predator pressure, these strong instincts have survived. So scientific research delving into animal sentience and animal consciousness is ongoing. It's a challenging field as human bias must be accounted for. So let me just find my slide here. So anthropomorphism is attributing human characteristics or behaviors to animals. And it must be, so anthropomorphism, when we're doing our research, does need to be recognized because it can create bias. From what I've read and observed with the animal rights movement, anthropomorphism is at the basis of their movement. And when we attribute these human characteristics to animals, it creates misunderstanding of the nature of an animal's mind and the cause of their behaviors. Instead of considering biology and ecology, animal rights activists attribute human characteristics to animals, which is taking sentience a step further than it should go, and it causes a lot of challenges for our industry. So this is where we diverge, animal welfare activists and animal welfare proponents. Yes, animals are sentient, but they don't have the same needs as we do as humans. And for those who work with animals every day, we know that cattle are prey animals and see the world differently than we do. Cattle live a pretty good life in a cow-calf operation, and let's face it, if we were to leave domesticated cattle to live naturally, they wouldn't exist for very long. In a natural setting, these animals would have a pretty cruel existence. So while the science of animal sentience has created better animal welfare standards, it's also the reason the animal rights movement was born. So animal welfare encompasses the humane treatment of animals, animal husbandry, and animal care, both body and mind. There are codes of practice developed for each production species to ensure that the 5 freedoms and provisions are being met. Animal rights activists believe that animals should have the same rights as humans and be free from exploitation and free from human use. All animals, even our cats, dogs, and horses, should be liberated from slavery. So there's another idea that's born from the animal rights propaganda, and that's Specie Ism, which is defined as prejudice or bias in favor of the interests of the members of one's own species and against the members of another. PETA, for example, defines speciesism as a misguided belief that one species is more important than the other. So, for example, we're really upset if a dog gets hit by a car, but we have no problem eating a bucket of chicken wings. So animal groups play on emotion, appeal to our conscience, and the use of anthropomorphism. They talk a lot about suffering, and it's the basis for their arguments that animals should not be used for food. So I do believe that animals should not unduly suffer. That's the basis of animal welfare ideals. And I do also believe that animals can be used for food without causing undue suffering. However, and this is something that animal rights activists don't think about, is that at the end of the day, we can't, as humans or animals, we all suffer to some degree. We can't completely prevent suffering. We suffer from heat, from the cold, from hunger, from the loss of loved ones, from injury, from disease, among other things. But if we're raising animals for food, we need to ensure that we're doing everything within our means to provide the basic necessities, which includes the freedom to express normal behaviors. Animal welfare ideas should be common sense, but where the discussions devolve is trying to discuss with people who really don't have an interest in understanding the needs of our livestock species. And trying to have these discussions with extremists is literally a waste of time. I would suggest that it's a little like playing chess with a pigeon. Anyway, so I would suggest to you that we need to concern ourselves with our consumers, and those are the people who we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about sentience, animal welfare, and how to maintain our social license. So we have rules and codes that provide the basic framework of how we do our job, but we do need to go above and beyond those. We need to be leaders in our community and stewards for animal welfare. We all have a duty to treat animals humanely, which does include a humane death. We also have a duty to speak for those who can't speak for themselves. So this means that if you do know of situations where animals are suffering, then as a producer, you do have a duty to report that for the good of the industry. So as Canadians, we have a vast quantity of land that's not amenable to many forms of agriculture and weather that doesn't permit growing for a good portion of the year. Cattle farming has a minimal impact on the natural environment, provides carbon sinks, wildlife habitat, and provides jobs to thousands who would otherwise be forced to move to large urban centres, adding to the urban sprawl. We could contribute to the economy by providing safe, humanely raised food. And our industry is incredibly important to our economy, but we can't take our job lightly or think we have a free pass. So what can we do about this microscope that we're now living under? I think that we should be using it to our advantage because there's no other place on earth that can raise beef like we can here right in Manitoba. So I want to talk about some of the things. I only have 10 minutes. 5 minutes? Shit. Even with the late start. Okay, I'm not going to get through anything. Awesome. Okay. So quickly then, because I have no time, some of the things that we can do, we really need to... I'm all screwed up in my slides too, sorry. So we need to understand our consumers. We really need to understand what the consumer wants, how they think, and be able to relate to the consumer. We need to be out and we need to be listening to them. We need to look at places like A&W. Their website is actually pretty impressive, as much as I can't stand them. But it really gives a great insight to the millennials, who they're targeting, and who is the next generation of meat eaters if all goes well. So we need to think about being positive, empathetic, and understanding, and we need to build trust through common values. We need to play to our strengths, so talk about what we're good at, and I can't get into this now because I don't have time. But we need to also think about how we're using social media. So current research is showing that social media does increase science knowledge and positive attitudes towards science. So we need to think about getting on social media as producers and producer groups to really emphasize what we're doing and not have that filtered through the media, which could distort what we're trying to get across. We need to be the face of food production. So I'm here today to encourage you to consider being the face of food production, because what they're showing is when people know the real you, then they'll trust what you're doing. And there's some great people out there, and I can't go into this right now. I was going to talk about my experience with animal rights activists and getting attacked, but I don't have time, unfortunately. Oh my goodness, I got so behind in these slides. I'm sorry, you guys. So some of the people out there doing great work on social media, I just have some quick examples here. Farmer Tim, there's Cody Creelman, who's a vet out in Alberta. Creekside Dairy is an organic dairy farm out in BC, and they've been very active on social media about talking about what the dairy industry is about. There's it's more dairies that I see out, and I think because there's so much public misunderstanding about the dairy industry that dairy producers are very, very active on social media. Dr. Hake is a veal vet down in the U.S., and she does great work as well. So these people are being, although they've been attacked by activists, as I have. What we've found is, although we do get attacked if we are the face for food production, but it's really important to still be out there, because this is the medium that most people are getting their information. And if we can show what great work we're doing, be brave, honest, transparent, and show who we really are, then this really resonates with the public, and it does create that trust that we need for our industry. Can't talk about that. So quickly, when you're going to use social media, we want to educate, not attack. So we want to, if somebody asks an honest question, instead of 50 people jumping on them, tagging them over and over, we want to really think about saying, hey, that's a great question. Here's the answer. Here's some good scientific information that you can read about to understand why we do these things. So I do think we really need to improve how we are using social media. So we need to think critically, be open-minded. We also need to engage in respectful debate. And I think that's a lot of times what gets left behind is, somebody challenges what we're doing, and instead of being open to a dialogue, we end up just shutting down and being like, well, you're stupid and you don't know what you're talking about, and this is the way things are done. And if that's our response, we're not creating allies to what we're doing. And, with the social license in mind, we need to be creating allies for our industry. What else? I wanted to also talk about quickly. Okay, so I wanted to quickly talk about as beef producers. Is there beef producers here? Fair bit? Yes, awesome. So I want to just quickly talk about things that we need to think about that are routine practices that need to be changing. Handling facilities. If you're going to be handling animals, you need to have a good working system. When you don't, when your chute is falling apart and animals are smashing through or getting caught in your head gate, you're creating stress for those animals, you're creating potential injuries. As well, they don't load well. A good system that's set up properly, those animals load without having to use stock prod on them, that you can just walk along and they'll flow in. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. Another huge pet peeve for me is weaning. And I was just at the vet college, and Dr. Stuckey was talking about the same thing. So calves that just get sold, so wet calves getting sold right off the cow, go to feedlots. They don't know anything except they've just gotten taken from their mom. So that's creating huge amounts of stress for those animals. So I would like people to really think about a pre-weaning program. And pre-weaning programs work great if you're doing proper vaccinations, if your cow herd is vaccinated. It's kind of lazy, well, it is lazy to just take those calves off, wean them, and sell them. You can do a pre-weaning program without losing animals very effectively, and it's been shown over and over again. And you will make more money, but that shouldn't even matter. It should be an animal welfare issue. Those calves are going under extreme amounts of stress when they're just taken from their moms, taken to the auction mart, and then shipped to a feedlot when they don't even know how to eat food on their own. So that should be something that's done on the farm, and it's a huge one for me that I'd like people to really think about if you haven't adopted a pre-weaning program. As well, auction marts, thinking about selling right off the farm. There are great venues for doing that. Manure disposal quickly, cleaning up your farm. It's an environmental issue. It looks bad when people drive by and see giant piles of manure. Bedding and shelter for your animals. If animals are getting a lot of tag on them, we know why that's happening. So keeping them clean, lots of bedding, protection, whether it's in the form of bush or slabs or something, because in -40, it is not fair to ask a naked bull to be standing out in the middle of a prairie. It's just not. Herd density, if you're growing your herd, we need to be thinking about pen size. Same with barn space for calving in the spring. If you're calving cows in January, February, March, we know that they're going to encounter crappy weather. So having the proper barn space or thinking about changing to May calving where you don't have to deal with all those issues. Way less labor intensive and way easier on those young calves. Prudent antibiotic use, so quit using antibiotics when you don't know what the hell is going on with the animal. Make sure you've got a great relationship with your vet so you can call them and say, hey, this is what I've got going on. And they know you and they know your practice, your practices that you use, and they can make a recommendation or say, no, we really need to see that animal. And then I will just do one more and then I will quit. So the one other big one for me is diseases that are not going to get better. So cancer eyes, lumpy jaws, severe lamenesses. Those animals aren't going to get better. So when I come to preg check in the fall or winter, I shouldn't see an animal with this massive, hugely distorted jaw that's just been left because you couldn't be bothered to shoot it. Take some of those, think about if an animal rights activist came to your place, what would they see? Would they see animals in various states of disease processes? And it's an animal welfare issue that I think we can become complacent to because she's not losing that much weight. Well, she's not going to get better, so just think about taking care of those sooner. And so I'll just do my conclusion, I'll be done. So being a food producer is often busy, a thankless job. We get busy in our operations and our quiet lives away from the hustle and bustle. But we need to keep in mind that we are raising food for the consumer. And that animal welfare needs to be our first priority. So in the morning and in the evening, that's the first thing and the last thing that we think about. I think that each of us needs to do our part to improve the industry. We can find better ways within our operation, our community, and our province, so ways to do things better. We need to be role models in our community and lead by example. And I definitely think that actions speak louder than words, but we also need to be a voice in this day and age for our industry. We need to show a strong, united front to the public, but we also need to be willing to listen and engage in dialogue. So thanks, that was kind of quick, and I had more to say, but I appreciate you guys all listening today.